what in the world does it mean that there's no self? So that's an excellent question. So let's combine these two questions, which is, the Goenka Mahasavada Vipassana question and the no self question. Okay. So consider this. Um, First, again, all of these body scanning practices where you're learning to gain direct access to what your senses are doing, and in particular what your tactile sense is doing, and then pulling back and becoming aware of the contents of your mind. So again, for those who did retreat, potentially at some point in retreat, right? If this is normally, it feels like this. Like if you look at your mind right now, you're having a thought and you're having a feeling. You're having many thoughts, many feelings, and it seems like you and your mind and the thoughts and feelings are like this, right? It seems like you are the thought. That's my thought. That's who I am. That's my feeling. That's who I am, right? But as soon as you start gaining some concentration, then you start to be able to go like this. And the mind that is being aware of the thought or emotion, and the thought and emotion and so forth, is now appearing in the mirror of the mind like this. So that the mind is aware of these things that are happening, but the mind doesn't self identify with those things. Okay. So when you're doing Goenka, Sawada, body scanning to mind scanning, whatever term you want to use, kinds of meditative approaches, this is all standard Buddhist kind of stuff. So I think up to that point, we would have to say, yeah, that's all Buddhist. And before that, what kind of ethics are they putting into place? Well, it's Buddhist ethics. So we've got Buddhist ethics, we've got Buddhist meditation, and then are they getting to selflessness or no self or not? Is the next question. And I think in the case of Sawada, I think 100%. In the case of Goenka's practices, I haven't seen them talk about selflessness, but all of those body scanning, mind scanning practices have to do with gaining experiential ability to see that all of the components that make you up are not the self that seems to be there when you're kind of not paying attention. And that's a big subject. So uh, there's a really fun, there's a really simple and fun thought experiment that Dr. Jay Garfield, put forward, and he said, imagine this, okay? If you want to understand the type of self that Buddhism is saying is not there, right? Because self could be defined in so many different ways. If you want to understand the one that Buddhism says is not there, think about this example. Imagine that you yourself were in imagine someone you know, okay? So pick a friend. Does everyone have a friend? Hopefully you all have at least one friend in real life. So pick someone you know, and just imagine that your mind was in their body. Can everybody do that? Okay. So you imagine that your mind is in their body. Okay. Now, imagine that you had their mind instead of your mind. Does it still feel like it's you somehow? Even though you have their mind and their body, and there's none of you left. But somehow me is there, right? You go, no, 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 no. Me is there, even though I have their mind and their body. So that sense of me that is somehow not tied up with the mind, that sense of me that is somehow also not tied up with the body, that sense that there is like this unchanging, independent, unitary or singular thing that is the real me, that I could, if I so desired, plop into my friend's body, and then I would have their body and mind, right? Like a little pearl, right? That little self, that self doesn't exist. And so when you look at Goenka practices, what's called dry vipassana, where you don't yet have samadhi, you don't yet have full concentration, but you're doing meditative analysis nonetheless to develop concentration, which is actually a new practice, relatively new practice. It's only been around 100 years or so. Works very well. But so when you do those practices, you gain the experiential ability to access and see, ah, here's the body, right? You went through all the components. You gain the ability to access and see, here's my five senses. You gain the ability to access and see, here are my thoughts. You gain the ability to access and see, here's my mind, being aware of all the thoughts and contents of mind, right? And having seen all of the components that make you up from direct experience, you know for sure from direct experience that little pearl of self that you thought was there isn't anywhere in the system. There's no part of the system that is that little pearl that you could pull out and simply transplant somewhere else. And this is why, really, the teachings on Buddhist wisdom aren't about faith and really aren't even about Buddhism. In fact, I've heard quite well known teachers say if another, like if you were Eastern Orthodox, for example, and you did the Eastern Orthodox prayer and gained samadhi through doing repetitive prayer, and then through some kind of special observation of yourself in concentration, you notice that what you thought was your soul, some sort of singular entity that made you what you are, you notice that wasn't there. That's Buddhist insight, right? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter all the rest of the trappings that you came to the insight with. I might have some questions about that interpretation, but it's still interesting to consider that really the the point is that when you look for this independent, unchanging, solitary thing that is completely different from body and mind, you can't find something like that. Okay, so now there's a whole bunch of questions and comments in the chat, so let me get through some of these. Uh, Wordscape says, we have Goenka in my country too. I try to discourage people from attending these kinds of meditation camps. The best option is to approach monastics, which supplement samadhi with dharma chats. Right. Okay, so from my understanding of the Goenka method, what makes them a challenge, let's say from the outside, to be polite, is that they want you to be 1,000% focused on Goenka. You're a Goenka person, okay? Put on your blinders. Everything else doesn't matter. You do Goenka, right? And so this comes off to some people as a little bit, so there's maybe a little problem there, right? Okay, fine. Okay, fine. I agree. That's probably not the best approach. On the other hand, especially in modern times, everybody wants to take everything and throw it into one big pot and go, oh, look, it's all the same. It's all one thing. I'm going to do on Tuesdays, I'm going to do like a drumming circle. And on Wednesdays, I'm going to do this. And then on Fridays, I'm going to do these 14 things. And we'll see where it ends up. Right. And where it ends up is like 20 years later, you're not very good at drumming or any of the other 17 things you tried. That's where it ends up. So there is something to be said about putting on the blinders and really doing one thing hardcore. Goenka also did, as far as I understand, include as part of his syllabus Dharma chats, but focused mostly on less talking, more doing the practices. And then it's more like a Zen style in some ways, where you do the practices and then they're pointing out to you the facts that you notice because you have done the practices, which is very skillful, I think. So again, I don't actually have a strong opinion about Goenka, but I do think their practices for mindfulness mindfulness and so forth are quite good. Uh, yeah, so we talked about a bit about no self. Someone said, when I meditate enough, feelings feel like they happen to me rather than they are me. Yeah, I mean, this is a very good insight. Yeah. So as you trade in meditation, you gain more experience in meditation. What I it's a bit like, I hate to use the cliche example, but it's a bit like an onion, okay? And you think when you get to the center of the onion, there's going to be a pearl of self. And you peel away the first layer, which let's say it's tactile sensations and the body. Okay, let's say that's the first layer. You peel that away and you go, oh, actually, individually, I could lose any component of the body and I wouldn't be missing. Like you could take this small part of my brain, and as long as you put it back where it was and take another little part of my brain and so forth, blah, 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 pretty much my entire nervous system could be done away with as long as you didn't do away with all of it and I died, right? And I, quote unquote, would still be here. Furthermore, you could take my left eye, you could take my right eye, you could take my nose, you could take my ears, you could take my tongue, you could take all of my tactile sensations, and I would seemingly still be here. And it's one thing to say all this, but if you do it in meditation, where you actually become aware of the entire tactile field, the entire auditory field, the entire visual field, the entire smell field, the entire taste field, and so forth, then it's a very powerful experiential reason where you go, actually, I looked for self standing between vision and what was seen. I actually looked there myself. And between the two, there was no self. There was just the seer, which was my eye, and the consciousness that was knowing what was coming in through the eye, and what was seen. That was it. There was no self in there. And then, having done that with the five external senses, then you look at consciousness, right? Which at first, as you said, it seems like this. It seems like feelings and thoughts and emotions and the mind are all kind of one garbled mess, and that's kind of me. And then you do some meditation and they kind of go like this. And then it seems like there's all of this, hey, hey, Offer John. That's okay. This was not scheduled. So you can always go back and watch the recording. It'll be in this folder. And I'm probably going to be doing these regularly since people seem to be getting something out of it. So, yeah, I mean, really, the whole theme of this, just to quickly divert, is pop in, ask questions, ask difficult questions, challenge things. Tell me what your difficulties are, and I'll do my best to answer them on the fly. Okay, so then you do some meditation, right? So we eliminated the five external senses as places where there was the type of self that we thought was there, right? We thought there was this singular me in there somewhere that was owning everything. We looked at vision and what was seen, and when we looked, all we found was like a seeing consciousness and a thing that was being seen. That's all we found. There was no self in between the two, like again, like a little pearl in between. It wasn't there. And so from experience, direct experience, you go, oh, that's not there. And then you do the same with hearing, smell, taste, and touch. And now all five external senses, which make you up, from personal experience. It doesn't matter what they wrote. It doesn't matter what Socrates had to say about it. Doesn't matter what Averroes had to say on the subject, or Maimonides, or the church fathers. Doesn't In a way, it doesn't matter what the Buddha had to say about it, because you looked. It's like you went to the fridge and you opened the door and you looked and there was no milk. And nobody can come along later and say, no, no, there was, you know, there was really milk there, because you opened it, you looked everywhere, literally, and there was no milk. Well, maybe your wife. Your wife could. Your wife would go in there and immediately find it. So if you want to find yourself, just get married and your wife will tell you all about yourself. Okay. So then you get to consciousness, right? Okay, we'll come back to that wordscape. So then you get to consciousness, right? You do some meditation. First, it seems like thoughts and consciousness and emotions are kind of like this, they're just stuck together. And then when the mind gets a little more calm, it's almost like there's one part of the mind that's calmly observing, and then there's stuff happening on the surface of the mind, and the mind is aware of it, but it isn't the mind. So, as the cleric said, uh, oh, when I meditate enough, feelings feel like they happen to me rather than they are me, right? And so, this is you looking at the contents of the mind and realizing there's no pearl in there. That's something happening to consciousness or happening in consciousness, right? But there's no self in there because it's constantly changing, it's arising and ceasing. Sometimes there's nothing, sometimes there's stuff there. So that's not a self, that's just a bunch of stuff. So then the mind looks at itself in terms of consciousness. And what does it find? Well, again, you have to look. You have to look and see, is there a self in there? Or is it just like vision where you looked and all that's there is what is seen and the seer, and the seer is the consciousness of vision. It's not a self. Right? And in the same way, the mental consciousness is the knower, not a self. Right? Mental consciousness is knowing the stuff that appears, is generated by and appears in mental consciousness. But again, you have to look in meditation, and this sort of go look and see, the invitation to look and see is something you find all the way from the Pali Canon all the way up to super advanced tantric stuff. It's all over the place. In reality, you have to gain the skill to be able to look inside and see if there's the self that you think is there or not. Now, of course, when you do that, you don't go, "Oh gosh, I don't exist anymore." Well, it's been good playing with you. I'm out of here. That's not how it goes, right? You just realize that the components that make you up are all that there is. There's not an additional thing that is you. There's just all of the components that make you up. And just like we were saying earlier, it's like the cup. All of these components are things that are constantly changing, made of parts, coming from causes and conditions. And if you ask the great meditators, including modern meditators, by the way, they'll tell you that when the mind gets sufficiently calm, you recall past lives. And then another major psychological event because you go, oh, wow, I haven't always had my mind and all the components making it up, besides the most fundamental elements, has also been changing for a long time, right? So, okay, I think that's probably enough about selflessness.